project that happened. And so we'll have a few slides up there for you and a couple of videos. You can go ahead and go to the next slide there, Chris, and so we can see Jesse Taylor up there. And that's a picture of Jesse playing his black Newman guitar, generally called Dice, is the nickname for the guitar. It's been called Tumbling Dice because of the Rolling Stones and stuff too, but most people just say Dice for the guitar, and that's his original guitar there. I do not have the guitar here. It is part of the Crossroads of Music, not Cross, or was part of the Crossroads of Music Archive that is now Southwest Music Archive. It's on display right now at the Buddy Holly Museum as part of an exhibit called Sunday Night Jam in association with Stubbs Barbecue. So the original is hanging in the Buddy Holly Museum right now. And I brought a reissue guitar that we're going to talk about here in a little bit. But first, I would like to go ahead and go to the next slide and introduce Jeff Smith, CEO and of Newman Guitars, and let him talk about the history of Newman Guitars and kind of where we got to this point of the restoration project that we'll talk about after that. So Jeff, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, excellent. Newman Guitars was established in 1977. Ted Newman Jones worked exclusively for Keith Richards from the late 71 on through to about 80. And in his establishment of working with Keith, they developed a body shape that still remains the same, unchanged all these years. It's been a very appealing shape. I recall the shape from magazines when I was a kid and had the opportunity of kind of like owning one. So Ted started in Austin in 77, and Keith Richards gave Ted $20,000 back then to start Newman Guitars. And so Ted opened up a shop and continued to build guitars in Austin for quite some time. And then as the story develops and as guitars were continuing to be built for other celebrities such as Dylan and Tom Petty and other people like that, James Honeyman Scott, those types of guitars were real pioneering guitars. Nobody was making a 5-string open G, and many, if not 99% of the builders out there aren't either. So this was pioneering a phase in the late 70s that Ted took up residency in Austin and continued to do great work with great people as they went through, seemed to be the music mecca of where he should be as a builder. And he was widely accepted in his building phase.
Very good. The next slide that I have after this one here is actually the 1980 blueprint. Go ahead. Of that 5-string. There it is. That's the 5-string guitar right there. That's the blueprint from 1980. Am I correct, Jeff?
Yes, it is. Yeah. It's actually January 1980. So it's an early bird. So back in 1980, people weren't really developing their own body style. They didn't have a top A-list player playing them. There weren't a lot of people out there that were doing this. There was some really good work happening in different phases, but in the late 70s, building your own guitar just wasn't nearly to the rise of popularity that luthierism is now.
And then this next slide will show some of the people that you had mentioned that have Newman guitars. We have Tom Petty down there, Ron Wood, of course, Keith Richards over there. And there's Lucinda Williams with a Newman acoustic guitar that was lost for quite some time, if I remember right, from an article, and then was returned to her.
Yeah, that was an exciting situation. She sent the guitar back to Ted in the 90s, and everybody lost track of it. And when Ted passed away and I recovered all the stuff from his shop, there was a Calton case, a brown Calton case, and it had Lucinda Williams's name punched on the serial number. and I opened it up and that was in there. But it was in disrepair. It needed a lot of work. So we restored it, and I met her in Indiana and hung out for a while and gave her the guitar back.
I think she might have played that guitar when I saw her open up for Robert Plant. Looks familiar. Yeah.
I don't know. It was a great one. It
Yeah.
was a really neat guitar, and Ted wasn't famous for building his acoustics, so that.
And looking at some of these pictures, you can see the iconic shape, acoustic excluded, of what, going back to the blueprint of what Newman Guitars looks like. This next slide, just some pictures, just a little collage that I put together of Ted. You want to share that interesting fact that you told me in a text a little bit earlier about today, about Ted?
Okay, Ted is such a whimsical dude, even after his passing. And every once in a while, his history resurfaces just like it is today for me. And today is his birthday.
So
he would have been 73 today.
And once again, some of the pictures of him holding guitars, and these on the bottom right or along the bottom when you and Ted started working on rebuilding the company back into Newman Guitars. Am I correct?
Yeah, that was great. The guitar he's holding that's turquoise color was the only other guitar that he had painted that was the same Joe Ely billiards guitar that was famously played there for a while. It was stolen for a long time. So that was the last guitar Ted ever made right there. He's holding.
Yeah, both of the Newman guitars, the one of Joe Ely and Jesse's Dice guitar, were both stolen. It took 20 years for Joe to get his back. Somebody in California found it. And then when Jesse's got stolen here in Lubbock, somebody went to a music store / pawn shop and tried to get money for it. They go, "How much do you think I can get for this?" And the owner of the store is like, "Probably at least 6 months." And the guy went running out of the store, but left his driver's license there. So they recovered the guitar, and Jesse was able to get the Dice guitar back. So, okay, well, let's go to the next slide there, Chris. And that is a picture of Jesse Taylor's Dice guitar, the body of it. Very well worn guitar, very well played guitar. It was his #1 guitar that he played after getting it built. And Ted built that guitar during the Rolling Stones Tattoo You tour, I believe, is when Jesse got that guitar.
Yeah, the first time it was ever played publicly was this Joe Ely opening up for the Stones in Tempe, Arizona for the Let's Spend the Night Together tour. So you could only imagine the first time that guitar ever got played, it was in front of about 70,000 people waiting to see the Stones. That's so funny.
Yeah, so besides Jesse, Keith would have been the first one to touch that guitar. And in Jesse Taylor's oral history that we have with him, he says when Keith got it, he goes, or walked in, Jesse walked in and had the guitar, and he was like, Jesse Guitar Taylor must have not have got a lotta, because that was the album that was out at the time. Yeah. And I had heard that it said, Tumbling Dice, that Keith had said that, but I haven't found that actually to be confirmed, but it is the Dice guitar. So
totally.
Next slide. So here's a picture of Jesse playing with John X. Reed, playing his famed Dice guitar in Austin, Texas. And Jesse and John have a album out together, Southside Guitars. It's a wonderful guitar album, instrumental, very, very hard to find. So if you can find it out there, I would suggest picking up. Next slide, please. So this is a picture and how I got to know Jeff and Newman Guitars. I was already familiar with Newman Guitars because I had Jesse's guitar. And the way I got Jesse's guitars, we have his collection here at Texas Tech University, part of the Music Archive. And his sister sold it to the archive to be part of his collection, and that was Jesse's wish. And then one day on Facebook, there was this talk of a reissue guitar being made, and as well as doing the red Newman guitar that Jesse Taylor owned, there was going to be repaired. And there was this chatter going on Facebook, and I said, well, the original Dice guitar is sitting right here next to me in my desk. And so that started a whole conversation, and David Holt put me in touch with Jeff, who was working on the red guitar that David has. And so this is me and Jeff and Nicole Taylor, Jesse Taylor's daughter, and we met at the Dallas Guitar Show. And I handed over the original Dice guitar for restoration to go back, to get it in playing order. There was broken machine heads on there, lots of rust, lots of crust. And I know that Jesse, there was debate, well, should this be done or not? And I was like, I don't think Jesse would want broken machine heads and for the guitar not to be in a playable condition. So we made the decision to do restoration. We had planned on doing an album where we are going to have people play that guitar as well as the prototypes that were put out, prototype 1 and 2. But then the pandemic hit and that just blew everything out of the water. So maybe we'll revisit that again. Next slide, please. So Jeff took the guitar and took it to Washington, Indiana, correct?
That is right. Yes, I did. The thing about the restoration of the guitar that was really important to me was I went to Macon, Georgia, and they let me play Duane Allman's Gold Top Les Paul. And I thought that there's no way as a guitar player to be any closer to the essence of that musician than to play his instrument. And so every instrument I thought that was historic should be preserved in playable condition for people like myself who would like to walk up and try to play it. There's a lot of guitars out there historic, like Marty Stewart's guitar. That's the Clarence White Telecaster and stuff like that, that are very playable, and historic pieces shouldn't wither away as a museum piece.
Mm-hmm. So. If you'll just click through the next couple of photos here, we'll see some of the more restoration process. You can see that's underneath the bridge, and a lot going on there, and definitely where the pickwear is. And I believe the next one shows some more body shots. Let me see if I can. Will this clicker work? Okay. And so that's after restoration in the new case that Jeff provided for us for the Dice guitar. And then I was able to go up and pick up the guitar in Indiana and meet Jeff at his home up there and pick up the guitar and get to see what else was going on there in Washington, Indiana a little bit. Next slide, please. There should be a video. So that was a video that Jeff had shot, and then that was Jesse Taylor playing Caveman from one of his albums. So I thought you should hear some Jesse Taylor music there. You can go to the next slide. And that's the Red Newman so you worked on the Red Newman first, correct, Jeff?
Yeah, that's right. That's David Lee Holt got a hold of me and said that they had that guitar and they wanted to make it restored playable. And that's another thing between that and Duane Allman's Gold Top Les Paul. When the chance to do Dice came around, that was the greatest thing in the world.
And I have another just a little short 1-minute video that he did of the Red guitar. Once again, set to some Jesse Taylor music from his Last Night album. All right, you can go to the next slide. So out of that project, Vintage Guitar Magazine got in touch with Jeff and they did this article on West Texas guitars, which really featured a lot of the Newman stuff there, with Joe Ely's included in there, as well as Jesse Taylor in the project. You want to talk about that a little bit, Jeff, and how that came about?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've known Ward Meeker for a little while at Vintage Guitar Magazine, and the Jesse story is a great story, and it just all fit together. It took a little while for the article to come together, the restoration projects and everything else like this, or you'd hate to write an article and, oh, we just got done with another. You got to kind of let that whole situation go. And so once Dice was all done and everything else like this, and we met, and you know, it was and Nicole at the Dallas Guitar Show and Curtis dropping off the guitar. It was such a story waiting to happen, that this was obviously something that should be published.
And, you know, besides Joe Perry's name, Jesse gets pretty good billing down there. Jesse Taylor, Guitar Taylor, and West Texas Guitars. I don't know if you can see this or not, but what I'm holding here is Prototype 2, which is a reissue of Jesse Taylor's Dice guitar. And there's a Prototype 1 and a Prototype 2. This is Prototype 2 that I bought from Jeff. And I'd always wanted a Newman guitar. And then when this one became available, and being a West Texas music historian, I jumped on it. And I mean, I couldn't resist, you know. And it's kind of hard to see here in the light, but there's all the dice inlay up and down the neck. And then, of course, the dice knobs and this beautiful perloid binding all around. Can you talk about the reissue guitars a little bit?
Yeah, the most interesting thing, I think, was that when we met at the Dallas Guitar Show and you dropped off the original, we had that picture session that you showed earlier. That was the two guitars meeting. We were building the Dice guitar without ever seeing it in person. We just saw pictures and started building it. And so when we met at the Dallas Guitar Show, those two guitars, the Prototype, even though that's Prototype 2, Prototype 1 that went to David Lee Holt, that was an incredible moment, because the first guitar and the second guitar, I could actually, I mean, the original and the first guitar, I could actually look at together. And that's probably why there's a huge smile on my face.
And are there any plans to, I guess there would be a special order or something if somebody wanted one of those?
Yeah, they're beautiful guitars, and we would do them as a special order. The dice are the actual dice from the same casino that we got from the Dice guitar. So we bought a few extra pair of dice. And going from that, we put actual dice shaved off the face of it and inlaid it in the ebony fretboard. So it's dice.
It's quite stunning. I wish you could see it over Zoom. Folks here in the room will be able to see it up close. But in just a little side note about those dice knobs, Larry Lang was a bass player in Tornado Alley and manager for that band, and played with Jesse for many, many, many years. And people would always want those dice knobs from his guitar. And Jesse was a very humble, modest guy, very giving person. And he would often give those dice. So Larry had this drawer at his house, and he showed me this drawer out in his workroom full of dice. And he'd be ready to drill out more dice to replace those and put them on Jesse's guitar. So very, very humble person. Next slide, please. So here we have a picture of Dice guitar, the billiards guitar, which is Joe Ely's guitar, which is a pool theme because Joe likes to play pool, and then of course the red guitar. So three famous West Texas guitars right there. And David Holt still has the red guitar, and it's been on exhibit at the Austin Bergstrom Airport before out there. And I think David has it back now. I don't think it's still up. And like I said, Jesse's original Dice guitar is up at the Buddy Holly Museum right now as part of the Sunday Night Jam exhibit that's up. Next slide, please. So, Jeff, talk about what's going on with Newman Guitars today and the future.
Today, we've been developing a lighter weight body using honeycomb chambers. It's a concept that Billy Gibbons had kind of given us direction on for reduced body weight and increased resonance. The biggest thing really is he would come to us and say, can you build a 5-pound guitar? One of the hardest things to probably do in engineering is to make it stronger and lighter. And so that's kind of where the Billy situation is he doesn't necessarily come to you and like say, go make it happen. He comes to you and brings you ideas. And then you basically cultivate those ideas to see if you can achieve what you're looking for. What you're looking at is a crayon drawing that he did on his the floor of his tour bus in July, a couple of years back. And it basically took almost 9 months to a year to cultivate this idea and this vision into an actual guitar that hits the stage, maybe a year.
I think that's so cool. A crayon drawing that Billy Gibbons did becomes this guitar. Next slide, please. And there's the guitar.
Yeah, for sure. And they're all pinstripe. That's not actual binding, that's paint. He works with a pinstriper that we work with named Kirby in Kentucky. And what Kirby does is he paints the outline binding and he paints the circle. And so when you look on stage and you see the guitar, it looks like it has binding on it, but it's paint.
Let's go to the next slide. I think we have a picture of them on stage.
Yeah. He wants to incorporate other artists into his vision, and we were trying to hit deadlines for a bass that you see Elwood playing there, and I said if we can just bind it, just put plastic binding around the way a person would normally bind a guitar, we could like shave 3 weeks off of the building time. But he's like, nope, we're it's got to go to Kirby, and we're going to pinstripe it. And so that's what's funny, it's what you got to do.
One thing I like about these, the guitars are a lot of weight, but then when I have like an SG on or something, they're really like heavy on the headstock and they kind of go down. You've got a pretty nice balance here, even though you're lightening the body. You seem to have a really good balance between the neck and the body, so it sits well on the player. Yeah,
you take a lot of the weight out of the neck by channeling it and putting in carbon fiber rods for stability. The ones that we did for Billy that are seen here used Spanish cedar as neck material. So we used lighter weight neck materials. We used carbon fiber rods, stiffeners for stability that took out some of the weight. And he also required a company called Godo made a tuning key called Stealth, and they were the hardest thing in the world to find, but they don't weigh anything and they're really cool. So anyway, we did all those things to avoid neck dive.
One thing I'd like to back up just for a second is earlier we've seen the slide with Ted with the turquoise guitar, and that was the last one that Ted built. Talk a little bit about carrying on his vision and how you were able to do that with technology.
Well, I started working with Ted in March of 2015, and when he and I worked together towards that turquoise guitar, and we're going to be building other ones and using that as the prototype. About 8 months into that relationship, he was 7 months into that relationship, he was diagnosed with cancer, lung cancer, and it slowed everything down. And as opposed to saying, well, Ted, it's been good to know you, I said, I'll go get help. And I took that turquoise guitar and went for help. Found it in Jacob Harper. I was real lucky for that because he was a builder that was probably 45 miles away from my house, and he took the turquoise guitar and we digitized it. and we put it on a CAD system, and we got the neck carved just right and everything else like this. And it took us about 3 months, but we actually turned out a guitar and showed it to Ted. Here's what we got from that turquoise guitar. And, you know, he was ill with lung cancer and dealing with a lot of things. And I was working with him a lot in his health. So we didn't really have a lot of time to work together with lung cancer. We had to talk a lot and had to choose our conversations carefully. And he'd call me at 4 a.m. and go, "Hey, I got this idea. What are you doing up?" And I'm like, "I'm not up. You called." And I loved him dearly. He was a great man. So
I think the next slide may be our last slide, which is just a picture of when I first got the guitar. I just went and got a photographer, and we just took a picture of the guitar and put Jesse's signature down there from an art piece he had. And then up at the top, it's all I ever wanted to do was a quote from Jesse from an oral history. I would go over to newmanguitars.com, correct? There's a
Yes.
gallery of photos of what they're doing with metal work and all kinds of new designs on the curved tops and stuff. Talk just a minute about that, and then we'll open it up for questions here in a minute. But some of the how you're collaborating with other artists.
Yeah, Danny O'Brien, who was a key person to Zamitis, which was another guitar company that was in the mid 70s. That was Tony Zamitis was developing these like crazy, wonderful guitars, and had these metal tops. And Danny O'Brien in England would engrave the top of them. A few years ago, Danny had stopped his relationship with Zamitis and opened up the opportunity to work together, and we gladly did it. We developed some guitars that are one of a kinds and world class. Very proud of them.
Very good. Well, we're getting a little short on time. There's so much we could talk about Newman Guitars and so much history. And there's, like I said, go over to the website for Newman Guitars and look at the gallery that's there. I'm hoping to sell a few instruments and get me a 5-string. I've got, I need a 5-string guitar because I don't have one. And it's just, as a guitar player, you got to have a 5-string guitar, I think, along with a 7 and an 8 and everything else. But we want to open it up to questions. Anybody out here in the audience or on Zoom?
Thanks very much, Curtis. Thanks, Jeff Smith. It's great to hear the history from the people who encountered the history and helped to continue it. I moved to Lubbock in the fall of 2000, and I never got a chance to meet Jesse, and I never got a chance to meet a lot of the Lubbock players. But one of the things that's very, very real here, and one of the reasons why I think EGAC is so comfortable here, is because there is a history of players and builders and venues in this synergy, like in this regional music city, which is carried in the memory of the people who remain. And so doing this kind of work with Curtis Peoples and the Southwest Archive, doing this work with the builders like Jeff Smith and Newman Guitars, it's a kind of historiography that's very, very real, but it can be both really durable because people have long memories, but also very fragile because sometimes we lose people like Ted. And so we're really appreciative of Jeff and Curtis and the players who are going to be here through the balance of the afternoon and indeed into this evening, because it's really about this place and this space and these days and these people and the way that the instrument connected them. So thanks very much to Jeff and to Curtis. And if there are questions in the room, or we've had great conversations already coming via the chat and our virtual attendees. So folks, please feel free to unmute or raise your digital hand or just let us hear from you. It looks like Steve and then Binod have their hands up. So Steve Waxman, go ahead.
Yeah, really enjoyed listening to the conversation you just had. I have a question that's kind of practical, but I'm also just curious with the Billy Gibbons guitar you were just talking about. I also was just looking on your website and I see that there was this great picture of the honeycomb design and whatnot. What was his design? Why did he want a guitar that weighed 5 pounds? Like we had a conversation in an earlier panel about how as we get older, that the weight of our instruments and amps starts to matter in a different way. So I'm curious, is this because he wanted to take pressure off his aging body? Is that the main reason, or was there some other motivation for him to have a guitar that's 5 pounds? And I'm asking because I want one now.
Yeah, I would say it's a prerequisite. I mean, he has to have it that way. And he's taken tops of Les Pauls off and had John Boland scoop the whole body out and then put the top back on.
Oh, wow.
It's just it's a prerequisite, I think, because of the physical nature of Les Paul's weighing 10 pounds by nature, but it's also, he's trying to create the Spruce Goose in many ways. He's trying to create almost the ultimate lightweight subject. When you feel the GT40 guitar, that's the blue guitar, if I handed it to you, it feels like a toy. It's kind of almost like, huh? You know, it's almost in some ways not realistic, but it is truly, you put it on stage, you could take it around the world and it's going to hold up and do well. It doesn't even feel like it's made of wood. It's neat.
Wow. Thank you.
Yeah,
Okay, thanks, Steve. Binod, I think you had a question.
Yes, so I have more like mathematics physics questions. So when you build a guitar, so the fret spacing, like it follows some kind of mathematical laws, right? So when you do the fret spacing, do you use like any kind of equations? Like I think like something like Mercin's law, or even like I've seen like some guitar like way back. So it has some kind of, instead of a straight fret, they had like some kind of wiggly fret, and they were saying something, because when you tune a guitar, but when you play a guitar, you're pressing the string, but when you press the string, the tension of the string will change. So that's why the guitar won't be on tune. That's why they were building some kind of like a wiggly shape fret instead of a straight line.
I can't really necessarily come into answering that one. You have to, from my perspective, the spacing of the lines is a mathematical equation. It's obvious that there's only so much space that you can have. If you're going to have 24 frets, then you're going to have to back them up a little bit versus 22 frets. So the spacing is going to be a little bit wider. I don't know necessarily if one thing is demanding over the other. We do a CNC cut on the frets. It's generally pretty concise, and then Jacob does the roundings of the frets, and we don't really have an inconsistency of things. But I understand that I don't necessarily know the mathematical equation to getting to the end result. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Binod. Tino, you had your hand up, I think.
Yeah, I'm gonna piggyback off of Steve's question, and 5-pound guitar and, light, having something light as you get older. I've been experimenting with Billy Gibbons strings, and he's got 7 to 38s. And in the context of players, especially in the blues tradition, that the thicker strings are better. Stevie Ray Vaughan at 13 than the high E, right? Everybody thought, the thicker string better the tone. Did you have to compensate for the thinner strings in terms of building the neck? Was that something that even came into consideration at all? And was he playing 7 to 38 at that point, or was it a heavier string gauge, if you know? Thanks.
Oh yeah, I do. It is a 7 to 38. If he's going to play slide, it's only an 8. He doesn't, it's not like he goes way up for a slide, but that does take into consideration how you're doing your nut. It does take into consideration, you don't really want a real wide neck. He wanted to, I think one of the things ergonomically that Steve was kind of honing in on is as you get older, you're wanting a guitar that you can basically design to kind of fit your body continually. And so he has the right focus for that. So we're one of the few, if the only thing he's ever done that's 24 frets in a small space of 24 3/4 scale. So am I answering your question? He really wants these light strings, and so that's why the bridge you know, all the way up to shipping the guitar to him. The bridge is a wraparound bridge or some other type of bridge. And I can only, you know, you put a 7 on there and all the people that you're talking to are going, well, you know, and so you just got to build it right, and you got to angle it, and you got to throw it out there. And he also has, at that time, he had Elwood that was doing his teching. So Elwood would have called me and said, hey, here's the deal going on. And since, you know, it's Evan now, Evan's doing his teching, and he would call me and say, hey, this string's buzzing, can you? And, you know, of course I'd say, yes, we can help you. And of course I wouldn't know what to do. So
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, Tino. Any other questions?
I wanted to add on the string thing there. I just recently watched a discussion if you go to Rick Beato's YouTube site, all these guys got together in the studio and said, let's all change these different gauge strings, and is the thicker better than the thinner, and so forth and so on. And there was a lot of different players playing, and they just had that discussion about string gauge, and they were bringing up Stevie Ray Vaughan and the blues and all of that. So if you go over there, you can get an interesting discussion about that. And I think Doug has a question.
Can you hold for a second? Just for the sake of our Zoom folks, Doug, I'm just going to repeat your question, right? So from Doug Stapp, who is one of our featured artists this afternoon at the roundtable and also this evening, the question is pertaining to the earlier question about radiusing frets, and has Curtis or does Jeff Smith have any experience with true tempering? Is that what you said, Doug? True temperament.
True temperament frets. That would be for Jeff.
Yeah, Jeff?
Yeah, I'm afraid I don't have an answer for that. More so a company man than a specific luthier builder. So I would have to defer to counsel for that one, which would be Jacob Harper, who's doing most of our buildings. So I'm sorry, I couldn't answer.
It's a
that.
good question, though. Obviously,
Excellent. And I wish I had the proper resources.
and I think that actually gets to Bino's earlier question as well. It's in that same zone of what do you do with an instrument whose very physical actions require pulling it out of tune? And so, you know, obviously, we have to defer to counsel and the luthiers, I guess, huh, Jeff?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. We should always defer to the luthiers. Any other questions or comments, thoughts that anybody has to share? Oh, I'm sorry. I guess I'm seeing one more in the chat. No, I think we got to that. Anybody else? If not, it just remains for me as chair to thank Jeff Smith of Newman Guitars and to thank Curtis Peoples of the Southwest Collection for bringing us a really deep discussion about local history, oral history, acoustics, physics, and memory. So please join me in thanking our panelists. We reconvene at 2:30 our time. That's about 18 minutes from now with a roundtable on Lubbock as a guitar town. And there is a discrete, unique Zoom link for that. And we invite you all to join us again in about 12 or 14 minutes. Thanks again to Jeff and to Curtis.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.